This isn't about being fancy, it's about understanding the single ingredient that can make or break your cooking. Salt. Pro chefs keep multiple types of salt in their kitchens for a reason. Each one serves a specific purpose that directly impacts flavor, texture, and taste. The difference between good food and great food often comes down to how you use salt, when you add it, which type you choose, and how much you use. Today, I'm gonna show you exactly how to master salt just like a pro. And stay tuned to discover how the right salt turns a simple ingredient into a restaurant-worthy dish that's surprisingly easy to make at home. So today, we are gonna break down everything I know about salt. We're gonna talk through the types of salt, from rock salt all the way through to cooking salt and everything in between. We're gonna talk about dry brining versus wet brining. We're gonna run you through why salt makes vegetables sing and taste delicious. Because salt isn't just a seasoning, it's hardwired into our survival. Our bodies literally need the stuff to function, which is why we have evolved to crave it. Because here's what's fascinating about salt. Salt amplifies flavors, especially sweetness and umami. It's a flavor enhancer that makes everything it touches taste more like itself. This is why adding the right amount of salt at the right time can transform your cooking, unlocking flavors that would otherwise remain hidden. Before we get into it, make sure you hit subscribe and stay up to date with the latest episodes. Now let's get salty. Let's start with the most common mistakes in the home kitchen, and that is usually undersalting or oversalting, because the amount of salt really affects the flavor and the texture of whatever you're doing. The other thing that you really need to keep in mind is that you can't just salt everything at the start and expect it to taste well seasoned all the way through. You've got to salt all the way through your cook. That's really important. The only exception to that rule is cooking something like a steak like this. However, sometimes you can use like the finishing salt at the end of a steak. So what's the difference between cooking salt, like I just put on there, and finishing salt? Let's run through it. We're gonna start at this end, the finest salt we've got. This is table salt, and as it says on the packet, it's designed to be on the table. Now, I think this is kind of a lost art, and for good reason, but I know when I grew up, there was always a salt shaker on the table, and to be perfectly honest, this was the only salt in our kitchen when I was growing up. It's really fine, and the reason it's fine is so you get a big area for coverage, and also so it comes out of the shaker faster. The next salt, or the next kind of size in salt, is what we call in Australia cooking salt. In the US, it's called kosher salt as well. It's a bigger grain than table salt, which means you get a really nice, even spreading across whatever you're using, so across steaks and stuff like that. In most of my recipes, when I'm referring to salt, if I'm referring to a tablespoon of salt, I'm referring to this salt. Because a tablespoon of cooking salt is gonna be less salty than a tablespoon of table salt. Himalayan rock salt, the pink stuff. This is also Himalayan rock salt. This comes from mines. It gets dug out of the ground. I think it's something ridiculous like 2 million years old, this stuff. Really, really old. All that is ground up this. Comes out in big blocks like this. There was a trend a while ago where people would heat these things up when you cook on them. It's kind of weird. I don't reckon you do it. Then we have finishing salts. So this is, there's a couple of like, the most famous brand of finishing salt is molten sea salt. Again, it's evaporated sea salt, but really large crystals. Great for finishing steaks, great for seasoning salads, and you'll see a lot of people say that you never cook with this, like on a steak. It's kind of not true. The reason most chefs don't cook with this stuff is because it's way more expensive than cooking salt. Then you've got rock salt. These are these really big rocks of salt, very, very pure. You don't really ever cook with this in like on a steak. You can use it for seasoning water because the water is going to break down. You can use this for certain techniques of cooking, and I'm going to show you some of that later on. It's kind of pretty crazy the way that a very old school way of roasting a chicken. And you can also use this if you're trying to cure something, because salt also can cook things without any heat. So cooking things in salt has been happening for millennia. This method is a Chinese method of cooking or like roasting a chicken before ovens were a thing. So I've got lots of rock salt in a wok. I'm gonna turn it on and get it hot. While that's getting hot, let's talk about the chicken that I got here. So this is a chicken that was rubbed in salt, and then I stuffed it with aromats. So we've got garlic, lemongrass and ginger, and then I wrapped it up really tightly in parchment paper. And that's how we're gonna cook it. People have been roasting fish, chickens, and salt in different methods for millennia, like all around the world. They did it in Greece, they did it in Italy, all on that Mediterranean coast, they did it in China. From my research, I think this is kind of the earliest method that you can kind of find about roasting salt. And they would have used like leaves to wrap the chicken or the fish before they had parchment paper. All right, now our salt is nice and hot. You hear it's starting to pop and get a bit crazy. We're gonna create a well in the center. We're gonna get our chicken in there. Ah, it is hot. Don't touch the salt, it hurts. And then nuzzle it around. Now you're probably thinking, Andy, what is the point of that? And to be perfectly honest, in a domestic environment like this, there probably really isn't one. I've got an oven right there. I could kind of just do it in the oven, but it's kind of more to show, I guess, a very kind of rudimentary oven. So we need to put a lid on this. I'm just gonna use another pan. We're gonna turn that heat down really low. We're gonna cook that for about 45, 50 minutes until that chicken's fully cooked. I'm pretty sure the reason that they would do it back in the day is because they were cooking over wood and coal. So if you did it with this using the thermal mass of the salt, it means you don't have to stoke the fire as much. If the fire goes down a little bit, the thermal mass of that salt is going to keep that chicken nicely roasting. But while I'm roasting that chicken, you remember that steak that I seasoned right at the start? Let's go talk about that. So brining. The difference between wet brining and dry brining is what you're kind of using it for application. You wouldn't wet brine a steak, but you would wet brine a chicken. So you take the amount of water that you're looking for, you use 5% of that water volume in salt, you dissolve the salt into the water, you can use aromats if you want, and then you put your chicken in the solution and you leave it in the fridge overnight. Now, why wouldn't you wet brine a steak? Because moisture is the enemy of a good crust on a steak. So you saw before, I seasoned the steak. That's probably, in real time, is probably about an hour ago. And you can see it's already almost completely dissolved. So yesterday I took a steak, and I put it in the fridge and I shoved a camera on it, and that's the footage that you're seeing now. As you can see, the salt turns to liquid, then that liquid sits on top of the steak and it gets absorbed into the steak, which is why you get a far more even salt penetration throughout the whole protein. And this is what you end up with. So you can see after 24 hours, it's dry again. It's completely changed color and there's no salt on it at all. All that salt has turned into liquid and then it's been absorbed by the muscle, by the steak itself. So what's the benefit of that? Really even seasoning all the way through, and you get a lovely dry surface, which means you're gonna get a really lovely crust when we pan fry the steak or you grill your steak. Just like a wet brine, you can work this out as a percentage of how much salt to put on your steak. However, I honestly never do. I season it slightly heavier than I would normally, and I'll leave it on a rack in the fridge overnight to do it. Whereas with a 24-hour wet brine, because you're completely submerging that bird into the liquid, I do use percentages, so I go 5%. So hypothetically, you want a steak and you don't have one that's been in there for 24 hours, do you still brine it if you've got an hour? Absolutely. Pull the steak out, season it, leave it on a tray at room temperature, and then just take a piece of kitchen towel and pat it dry. But this is the same steak from the same piece of meat, and you can see the difference in color. Lovely rosy and red. This is a bit duller. And the other interesting thing is you can see how kind of pliable the steak is, whereas this one is a lot stiffer. But I guess we better not waste these. Let's cook them both and see if there's any difference in the pan and once we've rested them. So you can see here, a pretty clear difference here. We've developed a much bigger crust before the steak overcooked, and the one that was brined overnight as compared to the one that was only brined for about an hour or so. Now that doesn't mean you can't develop a crust in a steak that you only brine for an hour. You're gonna have to do it in a much hotter pan. It's just gonna be harder to develop that crust before you overcook the center. But let's cut into the center and see what they taste like. So they've both cooked really nicely. We don't have a huge gray band on either of them, but this one, you know, they're cooked at the same temperature. So the same cuisson, and you can just see that you've got a much more developed crust on the one that we brined overnight. But do they taste any different? I have a sneaking suspicion they will. Now, I am not saying that this is a bad steak. It could have a lot more crust on it, but it is seasoned, and it's seasoned reasonably well. But the salt penetration in the one that you brine overnight was just way more evenly seasoned, and you just get much more beefy flavor. But let's see where we're at with this chicken. All right, so our chicken's been cooking in that salt for about 50 minutes now, and it's ready. But we're gonna pull it out, we're gonna let that rest over in the corner, and in the meantime, let's make some sauerkraut and talk about using salt as a preserve. So to make sauerkraut, we need cabbage, and lots of it. We're gonna slice it super fine on the mandolin. Then we're gonna weigh that cabbage. For every 1 kilo of cabbage, we're gonna add 20 grams of cooking salt. We're also gonna add some caraway seeds, and you can kind of add any aromats you want at this point. We're gonna sprinkle the salt and the caraway over the cabbage, mix it really, really well, massaging that salt into the cabbage. All right, I'm gonna let that marinate room temperature. While we're waiting for that, let's cut that chicken open. Let's see if it's worth using all that salt. Now, it's not gonna be like a roast chicken because it effectively steams in its own juices. It's got a little bit of color on it. Smells good, I'll tell you what. That's shocking. That's the juiciest chicken breast I've ever had that's not been sous vide, legitimately. I guess it's that slow cooking, that constant temperature from all that salt, and having all that paper around it, which captures all that steam, which means the bird steams from the inside out. Delicious, aromatic, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And as promised at the start, I talked about a restaurant quality dish that you can make at home that's way simpler than people think. And what it is Gravlax. We're gonna do beetroot cured Gravlax. Gravlax, it's a hard word to say sometimes. Why do we do beetroot cured? It adds like a nice earthiness to it. I put the glove on the wrong hand, we'll just change that. But it's a good way to demonstrate kind of the curing process. Once we've finished it, you'll be able to see how deep that salt penetrates in that salmon. So I've got one whole beetroot. I'm gonna grate that. To that, we've got equal amounts in volume, cooking salt and sugar. I've got a mortar and pestle here, some white peppercorns, and some coriander seeds. Now we're not trying to make a powder here, we're just trying to crack those seeds open and let that flavor permetrate. Permetrate. What does permetrate mean? I don't know. Permeate, that's the word I was looking for. And that goes. I've got the zest of a couple of lemons. These are just little ones. If you had a big one, one's probably enough. And then I've got a bunch of dill here. I'm just gonna cut those stalks off and then finely cut the rest of it. Then I do encourage you to use a glove for this. Beetroot stains. That is just a fillet that's been pin boned. Just gonna push it to the side. We're gonna mix our salt mixture till everything's well incorporated. So once that's nicely mixed, place maybe a third of it down the center of your tray and pat it out flat. Then place your salmon fillet on top and put the rest over the top of it. Make sure it's all completely covered. Then what we do is place another tray on top of this. We're gonna wrap it really well in cling film. We're gonna leave it in the fridge for 24 hours. Through the power of YouTube, we have one ready. So this was made at precisely 3 p.m. yesterday, and it is about 2 o'clock the next day. So it's 23 hours, and it is insane at how much liquid. When I put it in the fridge, I said, Sarah, be careful when you lift that out, because it's gonna go everywhere. And I lifted it out and it went everywhere. Look at how much liquid, and all that liquid has come out of the salmon. All we need to do at this point is scrape off all that extra salt, rinse it really well under water, and pat it dry. Right, I'm gonna cut this right through the center to show you the cross section. You can see the texture's completely changed and that beetroot colors come all the way through, penetrated right the way in. To cut Gravlax, you cut it at an angle away from yourself. Now, because of the thickness of the end, the tail piece, sometimes that can over-cure. So just take a little piece off and then you start slicing it. There you go. Beautiful salmon Gravlax. Super easy to make at home yourself, and a great example of how to use salt in different methods other than just seasoning your pot of pasta water. So the sauerkraut's been sitting here, well, it's not sauerkraut yet, it's just cabbage with salt on it, but it's been sitting around for about an hour, and you can see how much it's dropped in volume and the kind of color's changed. And when you pick some up, you should feel it's really moist, and to the point where you squeeze it, you can squeeze some liquid out of it. So I've got a couple of clean jars here. They've gone through like a sanitizing wash so that they are spotless clean. I've got some clean tongs. We're gonna fill these jars up with the cabbage. The trick is to kind of pack it down a bit as you go. So the reason we want to pack it down, just be careful if you put your hand in there that you can still get it out. But the reason we want to pack it down is that we want the liquid, the brine effectively, that's made from the cabbage letting off all the moisture because of the contact with the salt. We want that to cover the whole lot. So if you see here, when I push down, that liquid's covering the top, and that's what's going to preserve it. to the point where I think I've actually given myself more work than I need to, and I could have fit this all in one jar. So there you go, that whole cabbage actually fit in one jar, which is kind of crazy. Make sure that it's liquid at the top, that nice salty brine, that'll stop any bacteria growing in there. Put a lid on it, and if you don't have one of these fancy airlocks, which I'm going to fill up with water in a second, just make sure you burp the jar every day by just cracking the lid and letting any excess gas that's built up come out. So we're going to leave that at room temperature for 7 days, and then it should be good to eat. At that point, I'd put it in the fridge and put a normal lid on the top, otherwise it's going to start getting really, really funky. So at the end of the day, and after all of that, what salt do you really need when you're cooking at home? Well, start with these two, I think. Cooking salt or kosher salt for seasoning steaks, fish, using for water when you're blanching veggies, or if you're making sauerkraut or curing salmon. And then I'd have some kind of flaky sea salt for finishing. So for putting on steaks once they're carved, for seasoning salads, for anything that you're kind of putting on food that's ready to eat. The other key thing to remember is to season throughout the cooking process. If you're cooking a beef stew, you're gonna season the beef before you seal it off, and then throughout the cooking process, just little bits of salt as it cooks. And that way you're gonna really develop flavor all the way through. Legends, like this video if you've taken anything from it, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you next week for another video. Peace.